Did Nolan Wells' family not turn over his cell phone to the police? The lawyer for one of Nolan's friends just made that accusation on Dan Abrams' Sirius show, and we're going to bring on Dan to give his take on that and the latest on this case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. What a statement on the Nolan Wells case, right? Did Nolan Wells' family not turn over his phone to authorities? Now, I got to explain where this allegation is coming from because it just happened on Dan Abrams' Sirius show, and we're going to bring Dan on. But Nolan Wells, of course, is the 18-year-old college football player who died after a July 4th boating trip to this barrier island known as Horn Island out in Mississippi. His body was found on July 6th. His family is demanding answers. They are demanding a thorough and complete investigation. They have hired their own attorney, Ben Crump, to conduct an independent investigation as authorities, namely the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, conduct their own investigation. The results of the state official autopsy toxicology report, they have not been released. The case is expected to go to a grand jury under Mississippi law for potential criminal charges. Only after that could we expect to see the autopsy report, the toxicology report. But look, we don't even know for sure how Nolan died. We don't know the circumstances of his death. We don't know what caused his death. We don't even know if a crime has been committed. And by the way, as we talk about the Nolan Wells case, we have all these documents and information that we have compiled on our Long Crime Plus app. We have this case file section of all of our big cases. There's the Nolan Wells one. If you want to read these documents for yourself, get a full 360-degree picture of what's been happening in this case, you can check it all out there. And by the way, that's the truth on a lot of the cases that we cover. We cover a lot of big trials and cases here on Sidebar. But if you want all of the evidence, because we're kind of limited in how much we can show you right here, you can check out the case files on the Long Crime Plus app. So we're opening up the evidence vault. You can inspect the raw body cam footage, the 911 calls, the crime scene photos, the full trial tapes firsthand. You get ad-free streaming also, by the way, of all of your favorite law and crime and court TV shows. So see the full picture for an entire month free. Head on over to longcrimeplus.com. You can enter the promo code SIDEBAR and start exploring today. Hope you can check that out. Now, in light of what I'm talking about, in light of what I'm about to play you from SiriusXM, which is shocking, if true, we reported the other day that Nolan's friends, who apparently were with him that day, have hired lawyers. So we're talking about Warren Hudson, Jax Patallo, Morgan Seymour, and that according to TMZ, Hudson and Patallo took their lawyers, J. Tyler Cox and Edward Andrew Paltzik, back to Horn Island. So it seems they may be conducting their own independent investigation. And this seems to be in light of reported threats that they've been receiving. There's been kind of the rumblings they may file their own kind of defamation actions against people who have been spreading what they claim is misinformation about them online. So they go to this island, maybe get a better understanding of the island's layout, the dynamics. And to be clear, when I talk about potential litigation, there has been online speculation that they were somehow involved in what happened to Nolan. To be clear, there is nothing that we have seen released by authorities to verify that in any way. They deny any allegations. Also, Seymour, Hudson, and Patallo, they appeared on the Officer Tatum show, hosted by Brandon Tatum, who's been looking into this. And Patallo allegedly blamed Nolan's mom, Christine Wonsley, for all the social media frenzy that's out there, claiming that her, quote, blasting us on social media from the get-go, that was an issue, that she was putting their identities out there. And he claims the story was, quote, blown out of proportion. They have called Nolan their brother. Hudson also said, I wish we would have never went out, meaning never went out to Horn Island. So this brings us now to Dan Abrams' Sirius show yesterday. So Dan was interviewing the attorneys who I just mentioned, Mr. Cox and Mr. Paltzik. And that is when a caller named Mo.
Investigators are working to establish the facts through eyewitness accounts, physical evidence, and other reliable information. That was the Jackson County Sheriff's Office describing the Nolan Wells investigation in an official public statement. It sounds routine, almost painfully routine. But put one object in the middle of that sentence, and the entire case changes shape. A cell phone that traveled back from Horn Island without the young man who owned it. The phone is now less like a piece of technology and more like a locked room. Everyone knows it exists. Everyone believes it may contain a timeline. But the question is who has the key, who is examining it, and what exactly is supposed to happen when that examination finally occurs. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Project Cold Case, because we're not here to decide what happened before the evidence does. We follow the record, the filings, and the unanswered questions, Nolan Wells was 18 years old when he disappeared after a 4th of July trip to Horn Island, Mississippi. His body was found 2 days later. Authorities initially suspected drowning, but the cause and manner of death have remained unresolved, and the investigation has continued with assistance from the FBI. And then there is the phone. According to reporting based on statements from Wells' family, the phone was returned after the friends who traveled with Nolan came back from the island. His mother later raised concerns about missing or deleted content, particularly material associated with Snapchat. The family has also questioned why Nolan would have remained on the island without his phone. That is an allegation. It is not proof that someone deleted evidence. Those are two completely different things. And that distinction matters because this case has already become crowded with theories that outrun the evidence. What we can establish is more interesting. The family did not simply complain publicly about missing digital information. They went to court.
Discussing the case.
I have to say, and I mentioned this point before on Sidebar, that I find it interesting that not only have these guys, lawyered up and have taken kind of more of a proactive position, but they're going on Brandon Tatum's show. It seems to me that it might help their credibility. I'm curious your thought, because if you have these accusations against them, if they really were a part of this in some way, if they really had something to do with Nolan's death, the last thing they would want to do is litigate this and have discovery and have potentially damning evidence come out against them. They would remain quiet. Do you think I'm looking at it the wrong way? I mean, because that's something that came out to me.
That's exactly what their lawyer said. I mean, their lawyer specifically said to me, do you think we'd be so crazy as to put our clients out there if we thought that they had anything potentially incriminating to say? And, look, you do need to look at this, I think, this case from the kind of the big picture, which is, what is the evidence? And I always say this about this case when I talk about it, which is typically in these high profile investigations, when things are bubbling up, right, and the investigation is ongoing, what makes these cases have layers is inconsistencies, is things that don't add up about what the defendants are, what the witnesses, potential suspects are saying, right? And yet that hasn't been the case here, right? I mean, yeah, people are saying, well, I have questions about the call that they made for help. I have questions about why Nolan's phone was on the boat. Okay, that's great to have questions. But that's not the same thing as saying, wait a second here. This story doesn't make sense. The problem, with where we are today is their story, in my view, does kind of make sense, right?
On July 28, attorneys working with Nolan's family filed subpoenas seeking records from Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok, Meta platforms including Facebook and Instagram, and Life360. The requests seek communications, account information, photographs, videos, and location-related data that could help reconstruct Nolan's digital timeline. Legal translation. They are trying to make private companies preserve and produce information that may no longer exist on the phone itself. That is important, because deleted information on a phone does not necessarily mean deleted information everywhere. A message can leave a server record. A location application can retain timestamps. An account can preserve metadata. A photograph can carry information about when and where it was created or uploaded. The phone is one evidence source. The digital ecosystem around the phone is another. And now the story gets stranger. Recent reporting says the physical phone itself still had not undergone the agreed forensic examination because the family and prosecutors disagreed over how that examination should be conducted. The family's attorneys have said they are prepared for a joint forensic review involving investigators and potentially the FBI, while the district attorney has sought possession of the device for law enforcement examination. So stop for a second. The mystery is not simply, what is on Nolan Wells' phone? The mystery is, why has a device potentially capable of answering basic timeline questions become the subject of a dispute over who examines it and under what conditions? That is a much narrower question, and it is a much more useful one, because there are at least 3 separate claims floating around. First, that material was missing from the phone. Second, that the phone may contain information relevant to Nolan's final hours. Third, that someone intentionally removed or altered that information. The first has been alleged. The second is plainly plausible. The third remains unproven. Do not collapse them into one conclusion. That is exactly where investigations go wrong. And here is the ticking clock question. If Nolan's phone contains the last reliable digital trace of his movements, messages, or location, how long can investigators wait before the evidence itself becomes harder to recover, verify, or authenticate? That is the thriller hiding underneath the headline. Not who looks suspicious, not who has the most followers, not which theory is trending. The clock. Digital evidence has a different problem from physical evidence. Physical evidence can sit in a property room for weeks. Digital evidence can depend on preservation, account access, synchronization, metadata, and records held by third parties. Which is why the subpoenas matter. The family is not relying solely on the handset.
On that boat, so it seems to support the narrative he was on the island. The only thing that stands out to me right now that I just can't make sense of, if this was an accident, if this was a drowning, this is an island, like you said, so many people. I don't know who law enforcement has spoken to, but no one saw him. No one saw him in distress. No, that's the part about it.
I agree.
That's the only thing I can't grasp.
I completely agree. But that also doesn't point the finger at the friends, right?
100%.
Right? So if the friends left the island at the time that they say they left the island, right? Look, there is definitely like a question, like what happened here, right? I mean, he's talking to this woman. He didn't apparently talk to her for that long. He decided to stay on the island or stayed on the island, whatever the case may be. But you're right. We don't know then what happened after that. But that's a separate question from saying, oh, well, I'm suspicious of the friends because they made a phone call or because, all these wacky conspiracy theories out there. So we just need to separate out the desire to have a little bit of a better understanding of what could have happened to Nolan versus pointing the finger at the friends.
Before we wrap things up, there's one overarching question I've had for weeks now. Do you think that if there are no criminal charges from the grand jury, if the autopsy from the state shows this was an accidental drowning, is that going to be the end of the story? Or do you think that people out there, maybe even the family, will not accept that?
No way it's going to be the end of the story. Because as you know, Jesse, medical examiner reports are often ambiguous, right? They're often different ways to interpret it, right? So, the medical examiner really is going to assess, was it
They
a
are going
homicide
after the
or not?
surrounding records. The court filings reportedly demand broad categories of electronically stored information, including messages, account records, and location data. That is the evidence trail. And that brings us to the central contradiction. The family says they want a complete investigation. Authorities say they are conducting one. The family is pursuing an independent investigation. The FBI is assisting local investigators with digital evidence. And yet the phone itself has become a point of disagreement. No one needs to be accused of wrongdoing to recognize that as a problem. The unresolved process is the problem. And this is where the original accusation that Nolan's phone was wiped needs to be handled carefully. There is a difference between a phone containing deleted material and a phone being deliberately wiped. There is a difference between a missing Snapchat message and proof that somebody removed it. There is a difference between suspicion and forensic attribution. If investigators recover deleted data, the next question is not simply what disappeared. It is when, from what application, by what mechanism, under whose account, from which device, and whether the available metadata can establish who actually performed the action. That is what forensic analysis is supposed to do. It turns, I think, into the data shows. And right now, the public record does not establish that someone deliberately altered Nolan Wells' phone. It establishes something more frustrating. There are questions about the phone, there are legal efforts to obtain surrounding digital records, and the forensic examination of the handset has become entangled in a dispute over logistics and access. The phone is still a question. The phone is still a question. And the phone is still a question. That is not a verdict. It is a warning against pretending we already have one. There is another reason this matters. Nolan's independent autopsy was ultimately reported as undetermined pending further investigation, while the official state autopsy and toxicology findings have not been publicly released. Authorities have not announced a homicide charge, and no suspect has been established. So the phone cannot be treated as a magic object that will automatically solve the case. It may contain nothing decisive. It may contain corroboration. It may contain contradictions. Or it may simply confirm parts of the existing timeline. But investigators have to find out. And if the goal is really to determine what happened to Nolan Wells, the standard should be remarkably simple. Preserve the evidence. Examine it properly. Document the process. And let the results speak before the theories do. For anyone who wants to research this case rather than simply react to it, start with the publicly reported July 28 filings in Jackson County Chancery Court seeking records from Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, WhatsApp, and Life360. Read what the subpoenas actually request. Then compare those requests with the competing accounts about Nolan's phone and the proposed forensic examination. And here is the question I want you to answer in the comments after you read those filings based strictly on the documented evidence. What is the single most important piece of digital information investigators should establish first? Nolan's location, his communications, or the history of what happened to the phone itself? Until that answer comes from evidence, the mystery remains exactly where it started, with a young man missing from the timeline, and a phone that came home without him. If you want more evidence, first investigations from Project Cold Case, like this video. Share it with someone who wants the documents instead of the rumors, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because when the record changes, we'll be watching.
That report as opposed to Ben Crump, even though he tried to temper it, about missing body parts. I heard a gasp in the audience, but like you said, that's usually standard. But listen, as Dan Abrams always said,
for the second medical exam.
The second autopsy,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. And as Dan Abrams always says, when he concludes a case, as he concludes a story, we shall see. We shall see. So, Dan, thank you for taking the time. That was a really, I thought that interview that you did on your show was fantastic and very illuminating. So, Dan Abrams, SiriusXM, POTUS Channel 124, On Patrol Live. Dan's got a million things going on. I appreciate you taking the time.
Jesse, the man who has almost now as many things going on as me, which is great.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.